Hey guys, today we're going to learn how to solve a quadratic equation by completing the square. Now, just a couple of things before we get into this lesson. A perfect square is anything that you can easily square root. So when we are completing the square, what that means is that we are taking a quadratic equation and we are turning it into one that we can factor, where the factors would be identical, and so we can solve by square rooting. So it's easier when you go through an actual example. Now, we've learned in the past to solve a quadratic equation that we can factor. So what we're going to intend to do is take a quadratic equation and turning it into one that we can factor. So let's look at this particular example. We have here x squared minus 10x is equal to 0. Now, if we try to solve this by completing the square, what we're going to do is we're going to take the b and we are going to add to this equation b divided by 2, and then we're going to square it. So in this example, b is negative 10. If we divide b by 2, negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5, and then we square it, we get here 25. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take our equation here, x squared minus 10x, and we're going to add that number. So I'm going to add 25. And then we are going to make it equal to 0. And if I added 25 to one side of the equation, I have to add 25 to the other side of the equation. So what we got now is x squared minus 10x plus 25 is equal to 25. When we are completing the square, we don't need this number here to be 0. So how we solve this? We have x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals 25. We're going to factor this like normal. We're going to open the two parentheses, put x here and x here. The two numbers that multiply to give you 25 and add to give you negative 10 are negative 5 and negative 5, which equals to 25. Since these two factors are identical, I can rewrite this as x minus 5 squared, and this is going to equal to 25. Since this is squared, in order to get rid of this exponent, I am going to square root both sides. So this square root is going to cancel with this exponent, and I get x minus 5 is equal to, and don't forget, whenever we perform the action of square rooting a number, the answer is always plus or minus 5. Our final step would be to add the 5. Now, how do we add 5 to this? This means that we have x equals to this 5 plus 5 because of this plus 5, and x equals this 5 minus 5. Essentially, whatever number you get here, we can rewrite it as x equals 5 plus or minus 5. So that's what I did here. I separated it. 5 plus 5, and then 5 minus 5. 5 plus 5 is 10, and 5 minus 5 is 0. So these would be our two answers. Something to notice, when we create our factors here, these numbers, when you're completing the square, are going to end up being identical. And that is what creates here a perfect square. X minus 5 squared can be square rooted to give you x minus 5. And this number here is usually the same, or is always the same, as this number here. So I kind of created a little shortcut for us to be able to do these completing the square problems. Let's look at this one. We have x squared plus 14x minus 15 is equal to 0. And these are the steps that we're going to follow. This is the only time where we don't want our quadratic equation to equal to 0. We're going to rewrite the equation in the form x squared plus bx is equal to c. So we want this number here, the one that does not have the variable, to be on the other side. So I'm going to add the 15. Therefore, x squared plus 14x equals 15. And notice that I left a space here. The reason why I did that is because we are going to add a number here and here, just like we did in this previous example, where we added this 25 and then we added this 25 here. So I put here as an additional step, in case this was not so clear cut, get all the terms with the variable on one side of the equation and the constant on the other side, which is what I did here. Divide all terms of the equation by the coefficient of x squared if it is not 1. So here, this is 1, so we didn't have to worry about it. But if there was a number here, we would divide everything by that number. Next, we're going to complete the square by adding b divided by 2 squared to each side of the equation. Here, this is b. b divided by 2 is 7 squared, and then we're going to square it, so 7 squared. So I'm going to add 7 squared to the other side. We are always going to add. Now to write our factors. I write it like this because I created this little shortcut here. We are going to open our parentheses. We're going to put x. Whatever symbol is here, we're going to drop down. So this is plus. Whatever number is here, this is 7. And then these here are squared, so we're going to square it. And this is going to equal to 15 plus 7 squared, which is 49. This right here will always work, so that way you can skip the step of having to figure out those factors. Now let's continue this working out process. X plus 7 squared is equal to 15 plus 49, which is 64. Our next step is to square root so that we can get rid of this exponent. So x plus 7 is going to equal to the square root of 64, which is plus or minus 8. Our final step is to subtract the 7. And when I write this out, I'm going to write whatever I added or subtracted to the other side in front. So negative 7 plus or minus 8. And now we work out these two answers. X is going to equal to negative 7 plus 8, as well as x is going to equal to negative 7 minus 8. Negative 7 plus 8 is 1, and negative 7 minus 8 is negative 15. So our two answers here are x equals 1 and negative 15. Let's try that again. We got here x squared minus 2x is equal to negative 7. Here, we don't have to worry about moving anything to the other side because the negative 7 is already here. So I am now going to complete the square. X squared minus 2x, I'm going to add a number here, is going to equal to negative 7 plus, and I'm going to add another number here. Now when you're going to figure out what number goes here, that's always b divided by 2, and then you're going to square it. The good thing about this, you don't have to worry about whatever sign this is, just take the actual number. So the 2 divided by 2 is 1, and then we're going to square it. And whatever I add here, I have to add to this other number, to this other side. Now we're going to write our factors. So I'm going to open my parentheses, I'm going to put x, I'm going to copy this sign here. It's always copying the very first sign, so be minus. Copy the number that I have written in here, which is 1, and then I'm going to square it. And on this side, we got negative 7 plus 1 squared, which is 1. So we have x minus 1 squared is equal to negative 6. Then we square root both sides. Now when we square root this side, we'll notice that here this cancels out, so we got x minus 1 But here we have the square root of negative 6, which the square root of negative 6, remember we have a negative inside of the square root. That means I'm going to make it positive and take out I. So we got x minus 1 equals plus or minus, remember always plus or minus, I square root of 6. And now our final step would be to add the 1. So add 1, and we get x equals 1 plus or minus I square root of 6. And you can leave your answer like this since this is a complex number. And we still get two answers. Remember, we always if we end up with a complex number, it's always 2. We have the 1 plus I square root of 6 and 1 minus I square root of 6. But you can leave your answer just like that. Let's try this one over here. We have x squared minus 12x plus 11 equals 0. First, I'm going to subtract the 11. So I got x squared minus 12x. I'm going to add a number is equal to negative 11. And here I'm going to add that same number. We're going to take our b, which is 12. I'm going to divide by 2, so 6 squared. And I always write it like this because if I square it automatically, I won't see what number this is. I mean, it's a lot easier to then write our factor because we can just bring that number down. So we're going to open our parentheses. We copy x, copy this sign here, which is minus, copy the number 6, and it'll be squared, is going to equal to negative 11 plus 36. So x minus 6 squared equals to 25. Now we square root both sides. So x minus 6, because this will cancel with this, is going to equal to plus or minus 5. Finally, we add the 6. So x equals 6 plus or minus 5, which will give me x equals 6 plus 5 and x equals 6 minus 5. So our two answers would be 11 and 1. Let's try that one more time. Here we have x squared plus 8x plus 17 is equal to 0. Subtract the 17 to both sides, and we get x squared plus 8x. Remember, I'm going to leave a space here, is equal to negative 17 plus, and I'm leaving my space here. Divide the 8 by 2, we get 4 squared. And same thing here on this side. Now I'm going to write out my factors. Copy the x, copy that first sign, copy the number. Squared is going to equal to negative 17 plus 16. This gives me x plus 4 squared equals negative 1. Square root both sides, we get x plus 4 equals plus or minus, and the square root of negative 1, that is I, with no square root, because if I make it positive and bring out I, the square root of 1 is 1, so just plus or minus I. And next, subtract the 4. So x is going to equal to negative 4 plus or minus I. Last one. 3x squared minus 12x plus 6 equals 0. So first, I'm going to subtract the 6. I got 3x squared minus 12x is equal to negative 6. Now before I add my numbers, I don't want a number in front of the x squared. So whatever number that is, I'm going to divide everything by that number. And luckily, everything is divisible by 3. So x squared minus 4x, now I'm going to add my number, is going to equal to negative 2 plus something else. Take my b divided by 2, which is 2, and then square to both sides. Now we can write out our factors. copy the x, copy the symbol, copy the number, and square. And that's going to equal to -2 plus 4. So we have here x minus 2 squared is equal to 2. Square root both sides. This will cancel with this. So we got x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 2. And finally, add the 2. So x is going to equal to 2 plus or minus the square root of 2. And that is completing the square.